Hello, and welcome back to Health Without the System. I'm Dr. Tim Scott.
And my name is Mia Scott.
So, I think we have an interesting episode this week. We've been talking to people quite a bit about food, what's in food, how you should eat. And I think, this week we decided let's highlight on something we've mentioned, which is seed oils, which is really in a lot of food.
Yeah, it's unfortunately in everything. And if you guys are a follower, we thank you. And a few podcasts ago, we dug into pyramid and some ingredients and things like that. And seed oils are in everything. So the reason that we want to talk about that is because they don't go without harm. They're in your pantry, in your household staples, peanut butter, which we'll get into. They're in just so much. But we want to talk about what they actually do to the body and what are seed oils.
Yeah, why should we avoid them?
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting because, like a lot of things in the health world, for all the people that you find that can talk about why seed oils are bad, you will still find people that will argue that seed oils are not
good.
harmful
Yeah.
and are actually heart healthy.
Yep.
Yeah.
So this is our take on it, but you'll see at the end of the podcast, we don't really agree with seed oils at all. They're very toxic to our body. So what exactly is a seed oil? It's basically oil, and I'm going to use my quotation marks here because it's used from plants and seeds, things that aren't really oily, like sunflowers and soybean, which are a little better, but things that are very highly refined and a lot of chemicals added, which we'll get into. But basically, they put this in the food for stabilization, and it's a very cheap and effective way to put this additive in our food.
Yeah, there's also the conversation about basically like industrial waste, some of these oils and lubricants that then get processed down and manufactured into seed oils, palm oil, stuff like that, and basically end up in our food as a way for people to dispose of it. So I think we should talk about not only what they are, what they do to the body, how they're produced, negative effects, and we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah, we can talk about the history. So, how long ago was this? Well, this was a while ago, back in the 70s and 80s, ironically, when the food pyramid was happening, where they were saying, okay, let's take away the butter and the fat and those types of things, more of the natural one. And this is where the government had the subsidized farming industry. So this is your corn, your soybean crops that were heavily subsidized by the government, that they were able to produce these seed oils, especially like corn oil. And then this was introduced into our food. It was actually a wasted byproduct of like heavy machinery. It was for the dyes, and they realized that there was another purpose for this. Now, of course, is it the actual waste from an equipment now? No, it's actually a much different process now, but still, nonetheless, it is a very unnatural and very heavily chemicaled processed. The way the working line works to get these seed oils in our food.
Yeah, you mentioned corn. Soy, I think, is actually the most popular seed oil or the most common seed oil on earth. And I'm stealing a trick out of your bag today because I have some stats that I was going to share. The first is sort of the explosion of seed oil. So this is really interesting. Soybean oil consumption in the United States has increased 1,000-fold. So 1,000 times since the year 1909. In 1909, Americans on average had about 2 grams per day of soybean oil in their food. In 2023, we had 30 plus grams per person per day. They're saying more than 30. That is, just an incredible change. And vegetable oil production has increased from 17 million tons in 1965 to over 200 million tons by 2022. Like you said, byproduct of industrialization, cheap to produce, fillers, maybe taste, preservation.
Yeah, in fact, in order to get it to taste okay, it has to go through a very rigorous process. They actually can bleach it, and they add things like hexane because when they actually break this down and to get it into these oils, once again, you have to think that these aren't things that have natural oil to them. You go out and get a corn from the field. You go out and get a soybean or a sunflower, and you squeeze that. It's not an oily thing like an olive oil would be or an olive would be. So there's things that they have to do to break this down in order to get it to be oil. And one of them is adding a ton of hexane, which hexane is actually a forever chemical. It's a petroleum based. And even though they say that they can get rid of the hexane in this process, it still doesn't come without residue of the petroleum in there. And as we know, petroleum can take 20, 30, 40 years to leave your body. It's what's considered a forever chemical, which leads to multiple issues in itself. And that's one thing of multiple reasons on why these seed oils are just so poorly taken in by the body, and our bodies just don't do well with it. And it's the majority of calories that Americans eat come from seed oils. That's like the biggest fats that we eat is seed oils, which is a problem.
Yeah, so you mentioned the hexane, then the next step is lye. So they add the sodium hydroxide. They also add phosphoric acid to degum it. So the process is really disgusting. I mean, all the ingredients that are used to take this seed or plant and turn it into an oil is gross. And there's always going to be things left over. Like they'll tell you, yes, that's removed, this is purified, that's changed. But at the end of the day, there's always going to be some trace of this left.
Yeah, and then you get these, and I'm not obviously advocating that fast food industries are healthy by all means, but this is what your French fries are fried in, or your restaurants that continue to use these oils over and over again. And that is even a bigger problem because you can actually increase the toxicity the more that you heat that up. And even like at baseline, yes, they're still toxic to ingest without heat, but when you put them to heat, they can self-oxidize, they can be rancid, and they can have a bunch of free radicals. So when we ingest them, they just wreak havoc on our bodies. You get these places like McDonald's or things of that nature that they're frying their French fries in seed oils. Now, once again, these aren't health foods anyway, but you're having repetitive. I mean, who knows when the oil was changed last? So now you're getting a really big spike of these toxins. And you'll hear some companies or some businesses like, was it Steak and Shake, that said, we're going to go back to beef tallow to fry it in because that's what originally our French fries in fast food had to use. It was actually beef tallow, which
if
is
you're going to do
fine.
something, let's use beef tallow.
Which is fine. But then that goes back to my point where that's false advertising because this beef tallow that they're using, they'll use it at the actual restaurant, but their fries come pre-made, already soaked and made in vegetable oils. Then you're getting that fry and putting it on high heat. So you're not really saving much harm there. So you're going to catch these buzzwords about like no seed oils. Well, you really have to follow like, is it really truly no seed oils? And we can go into what this does to the antioxidants and things like that of your body. They're just very inflammatory, high calorie. They're not very nutritionally dense. They're the linoleic acid, which is the rancid, oxidizing, more unstable acids or fatty acids. So there's just lots of things that we can do to really avoid them.
Yeah, you're going down that omega-6 pathway, and we'll talk about it, but you're going to lead to arachidonic acid, which of course is your more inflammatory acid, and you really don't, you want to avoid that. We'll talk about the ratios a little bit more in this podcast, just to kind of finish the creation of these oils. So another step is the deodorization, where they heat the oils up, 500 degrees or more. And that, of course, that's supposed to strip out odors and flavors so that you have essentially this neutral product to cook in. But what that's going to do is destroy antioxidants, form your toxic byproducts. Trans fats can get created in that process, even though those are outlawed technically, aldehydes. And then the problem with that is they have to come back and add antioxidants later. And that's where you get into some of the really nasty stuff. We have TBHQ listed here, BHA and BHT. And these are things you can Google. I'm not going to pronounce all these crazy things, but that's part of the reason why we educate people when you're looking at the labels, when you're at the store, if you see things you can't pronounce. So this word is tertiary butyl hydroquinone, right? Like that's pretty hard to put it back. Like that's probably not good. That's probably not supposed to be in your body.
Right.
That's an example of one of the additives that they put back in these oils.
Yeah. And if you follow us, we're with Rixa Health, and we actually in our after visit summary give a video on how these seed oils are made. And when you actually watch the breakdown of this, like there's just nothing natural about these huge factories that have to do so much to break something down to put them in our food. Like it's just such an unnatural process. Then they have to add, like I said, the bleach and the deodorizers because it's so rancid. We wouldn't even be able to, it wouldn't even be palatable. I mean, they smell bad. And when you look at these videos, these people are in hazmat suits in their factories making this stuff. And it's like, it's in everything. It's in fillers. And my perfect example I give patients all the time is if you go to your pantry and you flip over your peanut butter and the very first ingredient is palm oil and then the next one is sugar, put it back. It's not that you can't have your peanut butter. There's just a better option that doesn't have that. Costco's a great one. You have 2-for-1 organic peanut butter, just organic peanuts and salt. That's all you need. So it's not that we avoid the foods that we like. It's just that there's better brands that you have to pay attention to because these seed oils are in everything. They're in baby formula. They're in so much that you would just like, why is this even in here?
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about why they can potentially be bad for the body. So a word we use all the time is oxidation, right? And for some of these seed oils, once they're produced, they're put in a bottle. By the time they even make it to your shelf, they are a word that we call rancid, or they have rancidity in them. And if they don't, let's say it makes it to you stable and it's not rancid, when you put them to heat on the stove, that's going to start to cause some oxidation. So when we discuss oxidation, what are we talking about?
That's basically creating wreaking havoc in the body where you have this disruption in your free radicals of your body, which can lead to cellular dysregulation, mitochondria impairment, very harmful to our mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of our cells. So if you listen to our last podcast, I always like to say and give a demonstration of my patients, imagine that your plumbing of your body is like your pipes in your house. And when they start to rust, that is like an oxidation process. They start to break down, peel off, crack, and they start to just go wrong. And then when you have this oxidative process, almost imagine it like a little firework going off in your body. Stuff is just flying everywhere, and your body can have these immune responses and send out macrophages and really do even more damage to try to clean up. That's what we talk about when we talk about oxidation. And these are oils that are oxidized with very simple things: oxygen, light, heat. Well, of course, everything is going to get oxygen and heat or light by the time it gets to you.
Yeah, so the process, you described the process in the body.
Yes.
There's also the oxidation of the oils itself, right? Yeah. So the fatty acids that are in the oils, like you said, they get exposed to light, maybe heat, maybe in your car it's 80 degrees. And then, of course, you're going to put it on a stove and cook it at some point. But they get exposed to light, heat, air. Those fatty acids break down into those same free radicals. Yeah. So you already have the free radicals, the toxic byproducts in the oil when you cook it, and then you make it worse, and then you eat it, and then it causes oxidation in your body. Yeah. So it's actually like multi-fold process here of causing damage. Yeah, it's essentially like Tim said, the byproduct of the oils breaking down because they're unstable bonds. So when you have that happen, and then they break down, and them themselves are toxic chemicals, then you're ingesting them, or even worse, you're heating them up on the stove or or deep frying something in this, and that's like the worst thing that you can do is have it be a very high smoke point and you're ingesting it, because those are just going to be the most toxic that they can be. Absolutely. And this whole time we're talking about this linoleic acid, this omega-6, this sort of the more inflammatory acid. And then what happens is these oils that are in your foods, you've heated them up, or you've just ingested them in a packaged product. Now they get in your digestive tract. We've talked many times before about how inflammatory foods, and this is an example of an inflammatory food. We've talked many times how you start with these nice tight bonds in your digestive tract, and eventually inflammation can cause that to widen, right? We call that leaky gut. Yeah. We call that inflammatory. I mean, it has a lot of different names within the gut. So what happens is these products end up in your gut, and now they can start to cross these membranes and they can get exposed to your immune system, which can cause autoimmune reactions like you discussed. But also your body starts to use them, absorb them, and incorporate them into its processes. So every time you make hormones, every time you make cells, the membranes of these, they need these acids, right? Yeah. They need omega-3 or they need omega-6. And if you're giving it a ton, you're giving your body a ton of omega-6, which is the one you don't want as much of, it's going to use it. So now all of a sudden you have these red blood cells floating around with tons of these bad, damaged acids in the membranes to make up the structure. Yeah. And like you said, our cells are absorbing that. And then you can have DNA damage and cellular damage and then mitochondrial damage. And then here goes this systemic effect of now you could have a dysregulation of your metabolism and your metabolic health starts to fail. So you could be looking at not only a disruption in your gut health, fatty liver, things of that nature that can just have the umbrella of things that come with it. So fatty liver, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, because anything that has inflammation in your body, you're just opening up the floodgates to say disease is coming. When your cells are inflamed, they can't do the proper exchange that they need to do, whether that's insulin, glucose, whether that's hormones bonding to your cells, whatever that is. When they're mad, inflamed cells, they cannot do their proper job. And these seed oils have definitely proven to have inflammation on a cellular level. Yeah, absolutely. So another statistic. So we're talking about the gut and the diet. So Americans now get about 20% of their daily calories from seed oils. So if you're on a 2,000 calorie diet, that means that 400 calories a day are coming just from these seed oils. And think of everything that we just said about them. That's terrible. Linoleic acid intake increased in the 1990s. About 2 to 3% of our calories came from these seed oils or linoleic acids. And now that's 8 to 10% by the early 2000s. And then now we're up to like 20%. And to me, that's just mind blowing. And you have to take a step back. People like us, we talk about this. Why did that happen? We talk about corporate capture. We talk about the government bodies, the FDA that have been captured and all these different subs. And everybody has an agenda, right? And it doesn't ever seem like anybody's agenda is your health. No. Even when they're telling you it is, it's like it's not. And we say this so many times, but follow the money. Yeah. Not only are these things easy to produce, sometimes it helps companies get rid of things. We get it all in foods. It doesn't cost them anything. It increases shelf life, makes it easier for them to sell more. And it's just that whole cycle of revenue. at the destruction of the average U.S. consumer's health.
Yeah. When you guys look at the ingredients and you see these seed oils like palm oil, canola oil, safflower, sunflower, soybean, these are not in your foods because they have nutritional value. They're a stabilizer. They have a longer shelf life than a few humans put together. Like, these are not health foods. These are a cheaper way to get food to your shelf and have the longevity be longer. These are things like, I was telling one of my patients earlier, you want your bread to get moldy in a few days. You want your fruit to degrade and decompose in a few days. That's health food, not something that you left in the back of your pantry, forgot about, and it's there by the next 4th of July and it's not moldy at all. And some of these oils will help that from happening. And imagine what that's doing to your body. These are preservatives. These are not for longevity or for health. They're not in there because you need it. They're in there because they're cheaper for the companies to make it.
Absolutely. And we'll do another podcast at some point where we actually talk about fat as like a component of your body. But I wanted to mention this really quick because these polyunsaturated fatty acids that you find in these seed oils, these deposit, like I said, they're in cell membranes, and how you mentioned, they're essentially like forever chemicals, but they're also in our fat stores. And in 1960, human adipose tissue contained about 6% linoleic acid. You have to remember the consumption then was very low, but because it lasts for so long, it builds up in fatty tissue, right? So even though the consumption was probably less than 1% of your calories per day, if you checked someone's fat tissue in the 60s, it was about 6% linoleic acid or omega-6. By 2008, that number rose to 21%. And then that's the last stat I have from 2008. And it takes 1 to 2 years. And I've even heard people say 2 to 3 years for linoleic acid to clear from fat stores. Imagine if you turn your fat over every, let's just say 2 years, how much of that's going to stick in there if you're eating this all the time. If you're eating out, if you're eating fast food, if you're eating a lot of processed food in general. Yep. And this, like you said, this causes not only inflammation locally in the fat stores, but in the body. Fat is almost like an organ, right? Fat is inflammatory. It actually causes changes in cells around it. It can change enzymes. It can actually act on DNA. So fat is not just this benign thing that sits in your body and makes you look a way you don't want to look.
I mean, they've really rocketed into our food system a lot, like the statistics have shown. And you look at these trends of sickness and obesity and disease processes. And I feel like we've been doing this for so long. We'll walk out in public. When you look at somebody and they're morbidly obese and they're inflamed, like, we could help them so much because you know that they're eating the standard American diet, a ton of seed oils, a ton of packaged processed breads, bagels, refined carbs, refined sugars, and a crap ton of seed oils. And that is why they look the way they do. It's not like any fault of their own because they're eating the food that is probably labeled heart healthy or whatever healthy. And it's really not. Going back to the basics and understanding exactly where this is coming from, because we were saying like the seed oils, it's the wrong omega, it's omega-6s, not the omega-3s. So you have to focus on the good omegas that are truly heart healthy. This is not something that you have to go back to the ancestors. This is not something that they made. When they wanted heart healthy, it was salmon. It was some of their grass-fed beef, their grass-fed butter. They didn't go to a factory and get their seed oils to get their omegas. It's just you have to look at the history and the timeline and the process to get to where we are.
Yeah, it's really cool too. Well, not cool. It's actually really sad. It tracks seed oil production and consumption tracks very nice with obesity from 1975 to 2016. Obesity worldwide tripled and seed oil consumption worldwide went up 6 times across the world. We talk about this a lot. I think there's many different things that contribute to obesity, to the mental health crisis that we see, to kids younger and younger having more neurodegenerative issues, to dementia. There are so many things that contributed to it. I'm never going to sit here and say it's one thing, but you have to consider all these things. And to me, seed oils are a big part of it. And then if you just take that one step further, processed food, I think we preach that more than anything. Remove processed food out of the equation and you don't have to worry about this as much. Right. I mean, this is where you're getting it. Where else are we really going to get a ton of omegas of this linoleic acid?
Yeah.
You know?
Right. And then that's things that we do in our family. So obviously we're a little bit more extreme than most, but it's not that you just can't have your diet revolve around that. Meaning there are some things that you might not ever be able to find something without seed oils. Perfect example would be chicken nuggets. We have 4 children. We understand busy lifestyles. We have a package of chicken nuggets in our freezer because sometimes life happens. We have to grab and go. So when you are looking at ingredients, if it's the first or at least the upper half, remember if you listened to our podcast before, those are the ingredients that are the most by weight. So for instance, if the very first ingredient is palm oil, for example, your peanut butter, the majority of that is palm oil. That's terrible. Versus on our chicken nuggets, if you flip the label over, it's one of the last maybe last third out of 15 or so ingredients. That is way less. And those are the ones that we're like, okay, we still have to pick a better option, even though that those are completely unavoidable for some cases, like the chicken nuggets.
Yeah.
And it's just knowing what you're eating.
And truthfully, I don't even advocate necessarily like do it in moderation. I don't really think it's okay. I wish we didn't buy them ever.
Yeah.
But it's just like
Right.
necessary. There are
can't.
some nights we have to just throw some chicken nuggets in the toaster oven.
Right.
Like, it just has to happen.
Yeah.
I just want to draw that delineation. I don't want to try to justify eating things that I don't necessarily approve of by saying, well, it's okay in moderation. The way I look at it is sometimes these are things that are necessary for your life. And if you can get the best option available, do that.
Yeah. And then as an alternative, like that's just one. The rest of our snacks for the kiddos, no seed oils. Every single thing that we get is making sure that we have no seed oils, no high fructose corn syrup, dyes. Those are pretty much the no's. There's maybe one off, but the majority of their diet is absolutely not seed oils. We have our kids eat salmon and things that they like. Now, granted, will you have all kids that eat salmon? No, I get that. But there's the grass-fed butter and alternatives that you can do. Butter is another amazing example where they will sneak in seed oils. And this goes back to our podcast saying, read the labels, because if you have a butter container and it'll say made with olive oil, if you flip that over, olive oil is the last ingredient, which means it probably has a splash of olive oil in it. And the very first ingredient is your palm, your soybean oil, canola oil. Put that back. That is false advertising. You don't want any of that. You want the butter that's literally butter and salt. And typically grass-fed, you can buy in bulk. It's not more expensive. It really isn't. You can get the same price right next to each other. The one that has true just cream and salt, and then the other one is the canola oil and cream and salt. Just choose a better option. Those are the things that we always tell our patients. You can have your things that you like. There's just alternatives that are better for you.
Yeah, we mentioned, and I bet you we'll do a podcast on omega-3-6 ratio because there's so much about that.
Yes.
But just real quick, we'll touch on it. We mentioned this balance, right? So if you look at our ancestors, we were meant to have a 1-to-1 balance between omega-3 and omega-6s, right? And these do deposit in our membrane. When our body goes to reach for one of these fatty acids that it needs, it's like, okay, give me an omega-3. This is a good one. I want it. But if we don't have any omega-3, it's like, okay, I'll take omega-6 because that's all that I have. As it's using that to build different structures, the cell that's going to line a blood vessel, the endothelium. Over time, you're building it with more inflammatory things, and maybe there's damaged or degraded DNA. This is how, when you get to the root cause of how does dementia develop, how do some of these other behavioral disturbances, ALS, they all have some root. Certainly there are some genetic components, don't get me wrong, but we've always said your genes are not your destiny, and genes are heavily modified by your environment. So when you get down to the root, this explains it. So going back to this example, we're meant to have approximately 1-to-1 ratio omega-3 to omega-6 in our diet. And it is estimated that the average American has greater than a 20-to-1 ratio of omega-6s to omega-3s. Yeah. We are getting 20 times more omega-6 than omega-3. I agree with the idea of we need to bring omega-6 down while we bring omega-3 up. Yep. Not only are you going to be improving cardiovascular risk, probably energy, health, reducing inflammation, but you're going to be decreasing some of these long-term risks of all the major chronic diseases that we've talked about, hypertension, type 2 diabetes, obesity, metabolic syndrome, and the neurodegenerative disorders are a big one. There's a lot of research out there regarding omega-3 and neurodegenerative disorders. It's kind of my plug. Another thing to think about, you can't supplement your way out of bad health, but certainly if you're making good, healthy decisions and adding some supplements on top of it, I would strongly consider a good omega-3 fish oil.
Yeah. And it's not like this is end all be all. You guys still have the autonomy to choose and live the life you do. We're just saying that what we do for our family and what we've learned and what we've seen trends and patterns and what we've been taught in our functional medicine school, our ratios are way off, and we can see that trend with the obesity. And another thing that he was saying about like the dementia and Alzheimer's, we're not saying that seed oil single-handedly is causing that. It's the inflammation. It's the oxidative stress. To him, that might come up as diabetes, where his cells just get so inflamed and they can't do a proper exchange, and now he has fatty liver and all these things. But for me, that could end up in dementia, which is ironically type 3 diabetes now. There's other things that it can cause in the body for different people, but majority, our message is that at the baseline, it's inflammatory, those oxidative stress, those free radicals that your body has to work really hard to suppress. And sometimes it just can't do that anymore because they're so chemically based.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. We say your genes are not your destiny. We talk about how the environment influences it. And I think it's also interesting to point out to the listeners what you said, that these changes over time do not always present the same way. And that's why you might see, or you might say, well, why did this person have dementia? Why does this person have diabetes? And it's just this multifactorial. They use the word toxic soup for our kids that we're swimming in.
Yeah.
And adults are swimming in toxic soup too. And you never know what's going to come out of it, what flavor.
Right. And I'll have these conversations with my patients when I tell them to like reducing seed oils. And for one patient, that might be like, wow, my knee or my joints feel so much better. And to somebody else, that's like my brain fog is gone. There's different ways that this might show in somebody else. But nonetheless, it's just another tool that you can add to your toolkit to make sure that you're living the less toxic lifestyle that you possibly can. Because I say this every time, if you are not actively trying to not live a toxic life, you are living one, given our environment.
Absolutely. I have a couple last stats here. You put these ones in, but I like them. Excess omega-6 intake has been associated with a 40 to 70% increased risk of chronic inflammatory diseases, which are all the things we always list. And then this other stat is pretty interesting. Reused seed oils, like in fast food frying, can create over 100 toxic compounds, including aldehydes linked to DNA damage, neurodegenerative diseases, all the things we've said before. And then the last one, seed oils may increase the risk of fatty liver by up to 5 times compared to saturated fats. That was in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. Liver is probably one of the next big epidemics. I mean, we're already in it at this point. We'll see it in so many people who are obese, but what you're seeing it in people who aren't morbidly obese like it used to be in the past. You're seeing it in relatively mildly overweight people. And again, it's because of these potent toxic and inflammatory compounds.
Yeah. And just a correction on there, it's 100 times higher than safe limits.
I'm sorry.
That's a huge difference. But like he said, when you go back and look at your parents and your grandparents and pictures of them, when you see a picture of a crowd, you can't really find somebody who's morbidly obese like you can today. And you watch these trends happen and you watch generations after generations and our food system change. And you just watch this right before your eyes where you're like, this wasn't normal to them back then. And it's really started to hit the ground running the last 20, 30-ish years when not only just seed oils, but of course the demise of our food system, the toxic chemicals that they allow, seed oils included.
And the rise of pharmaceuticals and the havoc that can wreak on your body. It's so interesting to me in the ER when I see someone come in on 10 to 12 different medications. And I'm like, at what point, what do you know what this medicine's doing and this one is and how they're interacting? And you simply don't.
Well, polypharmacy is one of the biggest causes of death in the United States as well. And it's not on purpose, obviously. It's just that you have these patients that are on so many medications that you're just like, I don't know what side effect caused what. Let's just throw another one to help that side effect. And I hate to say that we're not against medication because absolutely there's so many medications that have made a world of difference and really changed people's lives. But that's the perfect example of you give Big Pharma an inch, they take a mile. And now you have everything. Here's a pill for quite literally any ill symptom, side effect, anything that you need.
Yeah.
It's like a Pez dispenser. So those are things that have to get better, of course, with our food system as well. And then just another point of what we do at home here. If we're cooking at all, number one, you will never find any seed oil. Your vegetable, your canola, soybean, you'll never find that in our house to cook with either. Avoid that at all costs. If you are cooking, olive oil is a good one. So is coconut oil and avocado. Those are really the 3 oils that we use. Why? You grab a green olive, you squeeze it, you can feel that oil. That's a much more natural process. It's quite literally pressed. You can make your own olive oil with olives. So back to the basics. The 3 oils that we use in our house, when I say cook with, I mean like what we're prepping with in general. So for instance, the olive oil, that is a good dressing. You can make your own dressing with lemon and garlic and whatever. Those are like what you like to keep cold. But you have to remember that even the good oils are still going to have their smoke point or their high smoke point where they can still oxidize. Olive oil can still oxidize. Number one, just a random point, if you're not getting your olive oil in a dark container, you definitely need to. It'll be rancid by the time it gets to your shelf if it's in a clear container. So olive oil has to be in a dark container. But nonetheless, if you're actually cooking with something, typically I use ghee or grass-fed butter that has a much higher smoke point. Or if you're trying to cut the fats, maybe you had an extra fat that day and you want to limit that, you can do some bone broth or chicken broth right in the pan and use that to sear your eggs or whatever it is. It actually works great as a lubricant and it tastes good too. That is what we use here at home. We don't really cook with seed oils. The only thing that we do is the olive oil from Costco if we're like air frying something in the air fryer. Other than that, we don't cook with anything besides grass-fed butter or ghee.
Another good thing I've told people when they're trying to increase their omega-3s, especially if you run a little bit constipated, a shot of olive oil, organic extra virgin olive oil in the morning is very good to keep your bowels regular, increases your omega-3 consumption, helps, again, bring down omega-6, bring up omega-3. We want to get that as close to a 1-to-1 ratio as possible. And just to let you guys know how hard good that can be. Mia and I had our, what was it called? Like the fatty acid profile, whatever. We had it tested. And even with everything that we do, I was still 10-1. My ratio was still 10-1. I have to do better. I have to knock it down. I've said it on every podcast. I'll say it on this one. I don't eat perfect. There's times I eat fast food. I work in emergency departments. People will order in. So I'm going to do better. I really want to get that number down to 5-1 the next time I test it. I don't remember
what mine was.
I want to say you were like 8. You were better than me, but I can't remember what your number was.
Maybe we should make a challenge on that for
a
repeat.
Let's see who can get to 5.
But nonetheless, there's labs out there that can test. Do you have to test for all of this to the
No,
not to the nitty-gritty. Tim and I like to do a multiple array of labs every year just to assess our metabolic health, metabolic dysfunction, and just some fun labs that we're like, ooh, I want to see what's going on here. If you have anything that you want us to test for, we have our hands on pretty much any lab out there. But
RixaHealth.com. We're doing proactive wellness and lab visits now. Sometimes people just want to get some screening protocols. But again, not the point of this. You can do this stuff without getting tested. Just make the changes. Just live healthy. Your body's going to respond in an appropriate way. But if you have curiosity or you want to find out, it's out there.
Yep. So decrease your seed oils and then increase your good omega-3. Like I said, your salmon, your nuts, your seeds, things like that, and olive oil, dark container, non-rancid. It'll go a long way. So if this resonates at all with you, let us know.
Yeah, share it with a friend. We appreciate all of our listeners. Just a reminder, this podcast is for informational purposes only and is not medical advice. It's not a substitute for professional care, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult with your healthcare provider before making any changes to your health routine. Remember that you have the power. Join in next week and we will give you the knowledge.
Thanks again, guys.